Aboard the battleship Yamato, 300 miles behind his own strike force, Admiral Yamamoto stands over a chart table and does something he rarely allows himself. He relaxes. Radio silence surrounds him, the calm hum of a fleet moving exactly where he told it to move, exactly when he told it to move there. A staff officer refills his tea. Somewhere ahead, his carriers are already striking midway. Somewhere behind him, an invasion force steams toward the same objective, ready to land the moment the island's defenses break. Every ship, every timetable, every contingency has been calculated for months by a man widely regarded as the sharpest naval mind in the Pacific. He built this operation the way he builds everything, piece by piece, tested against every objection his own staff could raise, until nothing remained but the execution. It will unfold exactly as we have planned, he tells an aide, and he means it. So why, within hours, will this same admiral stand frozen over the same chart table, unable to explain what has just happened to his navy? The answer has nothing to do with Yamamoto's skill. It has everything to do with what he was certain he already knew, and how quietly, one by one, each of those certainties was already coming apart, hundreds of miles away, without his knowledge. Yamamoto did not build his reputation on aggression alone. He built it on precision. Educated at Harvard, a naval attaché in Washington, he had walked the floors of American shipyards and watched the country build faster than any nation on earth. And he used that knowledge to argue against war in the first place, warning his own government that Japan could not win a prolonged fight against American industry. His superiors overruled him. Once war came anyway, he stopped arguing and started engineering, calculating exactly how long Japan's advantage would last before American production overtook it. A window he privately measured in months, not years. Pearl Harbor was not a gamble, it was a deadline, and every operation that followed was built to buy Japan a little more time against it. Midway was his answer to that deadline, forced the remaining American carriers into one decisive battle, on Japanese terms, while Japan still held the advantage in ships and pilots. Every element of Operation MI exists to remove uncertainty from that engagement, to leave nothing to chance in an admiral's war that Yamamoto has spent his entire career trying to avoid fighting on chance at all. So it is worth asking, before the battle even begins, what exactly did Yamamoto believe he knew for certain, and which of those certainties was already false, quietly, before a single shot had been fired? The first certainty was simple. American cryptographers could not read Japan's naval code in time to matter. Japan had scheduled a changeover of its entire codebook only weeks before the operation, a routine precaution that should have blinded American intelligence at precisely the moment it mattered most. Japanese naval planners assessed the risk and moved forward anyway, confident the new system would hold long enough. It was a reasonable assessment, built on real evidence, and it was wrong in the one way that mattered most. In a windowless basement at Pearl Harbor, American cryptanalysts had not started from zero. They had spent months chipping away at the previous version of the same code, and enough of that foundation carried over that they cracked the essentials of the new system in time, piecing together fragments of Japanese naval traffic into something readable just as Yamamoto's plan began moving into motion. Somewhere in Tokyo, a staff officer signs off on the operation, believing its greatest asset is secrecy. 4,000 miles away, an American admiral is already reading the plan on paper. Yamamoto was not preparing a surprise attack. He was executing a plan the enemy had already read, and he had no way of knowing it. The second certainty ran even deeper, and it explains almost everything that follows. Yamamoto believed the United States Navy, still recovering from Pearl Harbor and the brutal carrier duel at Coral Sea only weeks earlier, could not possibly assemble more than 2 carriers to defend Midway. And even that was generous. His own intelligence reports placed the carrier Yorktown out of action for months, crippled by bomb damage from Coral Sea, her flight deck scorched, her hull leaking, her repair timeline logged at 90 days by every naval engineer who inspected her. On paper, Japan's 4 fleet carriers would face, at most, 2 exhausted American flat tops, outnumbered 2 to 1 before the battle even began. It was not arrogance. It was arithmetic, based on the best information Japanese intelligence could provide, and every officer on Yamamoto's staff signed off on it. What that arithmetic did not account for was Yorktown limping into Pearl Harbor trailing oil and smoke, and Nimitz walking her dry dock in person, demanding an answer he refused to accept. 90 days becomes 72 hours. Welders work through the night in scaffolding bolted directly over open hull breaches, patching what should have been rebuilt, wiring what should have been replaced, sending a wounded carrier back to sea still smelling of smoke. Yamamoto's 4 carriers were not sailing toward 2 exhausted American flat tops. They were sailing toward 3, and the third one should not have existed yet. The third certainty was structural, built into the very design of Operation MI. Yamamoto split his overwhelming fleet into multiple separate forces, spread across hundreds of miles of ocean. A diversionary strike toward the Aleutian Islands to the north, meant to convince Nimitz the real threat lay against Alaska. A separate invasion convoy trailing behind the carriers, loaded with troops for the landing that was supposed to follow an easy victory. A covering force of battleships built around Yamamoto's own flagship, held in reserve for the decisive clash he still believed was coming. And out in front of all of it, alone, Nagumo's 4 carriers. On a chart in Tokyo, dispersal looked like strength, and net cast wide enough to trap the American fleet wherever it appeared, whichever direction it chose to move. But dispersal carries a hidden cost, one that only reveals itself once the enemy already knows exactly where to look. It assumes he does not, because if he does, every ship sailing elsewhere is a ship that cannot help when it matters most. Yamamoto's northern diversion, meant to pull American attention and American carriers toward Alaska, pulls nothing at all. Nimitz never takes the bait. He knows Midway is the real target before Operation MI even leaves Japanese waters, because he has already read the plan, and he sends every available carrier there and nowhere else. Yamamoto had built a trap wide enough to catch an enemy who was never going to walk into it, and narrow enough at its center to leave Nagumo dangerously, fatally alone. And that isolation carried a cost no calculation could fix. Yamamoto himself, aboard Yamato, remained hundreds of miles behind the carriers, close enough to receive their reports, too far to influence the battle in real time, close enough to matter on paper and too far to matter in practice. Radio silence, ordered to protect the fleet's position from enemy direction finding, meant something else entirely once the fighting started. It meant that the most experienced strategist in the Imperial Navy, the man who had personally approved every detail of this operation, was reduced to a spectator, reading fragments of enemy contact reports hours after Nagumo had already been forced to decide without him. What good is the sharpest mind in the fleet, sitting 300 miles from the only decision that matters? Now watch what those 4 certainties do, together, in the span of a single morning, on a scale none of them could produce alone. Before dawn on June 4th, Nagumo's scout planes are meant to launch on a tight, overlapping schedule designed to sweep every possible approach an American fleet could use. One aircraft, catapulted from the cruiser Tone, launches late, delayed roughly 30 minutes by a mechanical fault on deck. On a normal day, 30 minutes means nothing. On this day, it means the single search leg most likely to find the American carriers is flown late, off its planned timing, at the exact moment the American fleet is sitting undetected in the gap that delay creates. When that scout finally radios back with word of enemy ships, the message is vague, incomplete, missing the one detail that would tell Nagumo everything he needs to know, whether a carrier sails among them, or only cruisers and destroyers unworthy of his full attention. What type of ships? The flagship demands. No answer comes for nearly 30 more minutes. Every one of those minutes is being spent aboard the Japanese carriers loading, unloading, and reloading aircraft for a threat whose full shape no one can yet see. Bombs for the island swapped for torpedoes against ships, then swapped back again as the picture keeps changing beneath men working in the heat of packed hangar decks. Somewhere behind them, Yamamoto receives the same fragments, delayed further still by the distance between his flagship and the front, arriving as second-hand echoes of a battle he can no longer shape. He is the architect of this entire operation, the man every subordinate answers to, and in its single most critical hour, he cannot even see the board clearly enough to move one piece on it. What was Yamamoto doing in that same hour? Waiting, trusting the plan, trusting Nagumo's judgment, and trusting that the assumptions built into Operation MI, no American code-breaking, no more than 2 worn-down carriers, no serious threat until Midway itself had fallen, still held exactly as they had on the day he approved them. They did not. One by one, invisibly, each of them had already failed, weeks or hours earlier, in places Yamamoto could not see and battles he was not fighting. And no radio message from Yamato could reach far enough or fast enough to undo any of it now. By mid-morning, 3 of Nagumo's 4 carriers are burning, torn open by American dive bombers that arrived from a direction no Japanese search plane had covered, at the precise moment Japanese decks were loaded with exposed fuel and ordnance from that morning's endless rearming. The details of that attack belong to another story, already told. What matters here is what happens next. Hundreds of miles away, aboard Yamato, when the reports finally reach Yamamoto, not as one dramatic message, but as a slow, worsening drip of fragments, each one revising the last towards something worse. Akadi damaged, a pause, Akadi burning uncontrollably, another pause, longer this time, then Kaga, then Soryu, the same. A staff officer reads each update aloud in a room that grows quieter with every sentence. For a commander who has spent his career reducing uncertainty to arithmetic, this is the one outcome his arithmetic never produced, the one column his calculations never carried. Witnesses describe him ashen, silent, staring at the chart table as though the numbers written on it have simply stopped making sense. He does not shout. He does not immediately order a retreat. For a long, terrible stretch of that morning, Isoroku Yamamoto simply does not know what to do, because nothing in months of meticulous planning prepared him for the version of this battle where he loses control of it entirely, and has no way left to take it back. Then comes the moment that reveals what kind of admiral he still is, even now, with 3 carriers already lost. Yamaguchi's Hiryu, the one carrier still standing, launches a counterstrike that wounds Yorktown badly enough that returning Japanese pilots report her sunk outright. For a few hours, it seems as though the disaster might yet be salvageable. 3 carriers lost, but 1 American flat top possibly destroyed in return, the fleet still theoretically capable of regrouping and fighting on into the evening. Yamamoto, still hundreds of miles removed from the fighting, begins weighing a counterattack of his own, pulling his battleships and cruisers forward, considering a night engagement where Japanese gunnery and training might yet reverse the outcome the daylight battle had denied him. It is here that his instincts as a gambler resurface, the same instincts that built the plan for Pearl Harbor out of a war he privately believed Japan could not win. Bring the fleet together, he orders, still convinced there is a version of this day that ends differently. But this time the numbers will not cooperate. Hiryu, exposed all afternoon without her sister carriers to share the search radius and spread the defensive fire, is found by American scout planes and destroyed in turn before nightfall, her fires visible for miles across open water. The report reaches Yamamoto after dark. All 4 carriers are gone. Every reasonable path back to the plan he approved has now closed. Only then, with every carrier lost and no realistic path left to reversing the battle, does Yamamoto give the order to withdraw the remaining fleet. It is, by every account of the men around him that day, one of the hardest decisions of his career, not because the retreat itself was difficult to calculate, the arithmetic of it was simple enough, but because it meant abandoning the deadline his entire strategy had been built around since before the first bomb ever fell on Pearl Harbor. There would be no decisive battle fought on Japanese terms. There would be no forcing the United States back to the negotiating table while Japan still held the advantage in carriers and trained pilots. The clock he had been racing since before the war even began had simply run out, in a single morning, in a manner his own intelligence had assured him was nearly impossible. He gives the withdrawal order quietly, without theatrics, the same way he has given every other order on this operation. And it is, in its quiet way, the clearest sign yet that the Admiral understands exactly what has just happened, even if he cannot yet explain how. So return to the question this documentary opened with. Why did Yamamoto never expect this? Not because he was careless, not because he underestimated his enemy in some obvious, avoidable way. Every failed assumption he carried into June 4th was, individually, a reasonable one? Reasonable given the intelligence Japan possessed, reasonable given how badly Yorktown had been hurt at Coral Sea, reasonable given how effectively Japan's code had served them for years. Yamamoto did not fail because he made one bad decision. He failed because 4 separate, defensible assumptions collapsed within the same 6-hour window, each one compounding the damage of the last, until a plan built for precision found itself operating on almost no reliable information at all. That is a far more unsettling kind of failure than simple overconfidence, because it means even Japan's most careful strategist could not have fully protected himself against it. The codebreakers he did not know existed, the repair crews who should have needed 3 months and took 3 days, the scout plane delayed by engine trouble, the radio silence that turned his own flagship into a bystander. No single one of these, alone, sinks 4 carriers. Together, in exactly the wrong order at exactly the wrong hour, they do. Yamamoto would live for nearly a year after Midway, continuing to command a Pacific fleet that could no longer dictate the terms of its own war, still calculating, still searching for a battle he could shape on his own terms the way he once shaped Pearl Harbor. He would never fully get one. In April 1943, his aircraft would be shot down over Bougainville by American fighters who, in a quiet echo of everything that came before, had once again read Japanese codes revealing exactly where and when he would be. The same vulnerability that cost him 4 carriers at Midway would, in the end, cost him his life. History rarely turns on a single mistake. More often, it turns on the moment several careful, reasonable assumptions all stop being true at once. And no admiral, however brilliant, can outcalculate a war that has already stopped following his numbers.